any questions, feel free to just throw them in the chat box. Scott Manley will be managing our Q&A, so you can find him as Q&A before his name if you want to send a private message, but feel free to send it publicly as well. And then Rachel's going to be helping with any tech issues, so feel free to message her if you have any, like with sound or something that comes up, feel free to message Rachel privately as well. We are also going to be recording this session, so you will be able to find it on the NAFSA YouTube playlist later. We'll email that out to everyone once it's available. And then I guess with that being said, I think we're pretty much ready to go. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Rachel, if you want to start, oh, you're recording. Okay, cool. Today's session is tools for building a virtual orientation during a pandemic. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Florence Adibu and Marta Schneider from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. This is Tools for Building a Virtual Orientation During a Pandemic. My name is Marta Schneider. I am the Assistant Director for Global Communication at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Florence Adibu, and I'm an International Training and Program Specialist in the Office of International Student and Scholar Services. So today, what we're going to cover are 3 models for hosting a virtual orientation, specifically using Zoom Pro as an apparatus. We know that some universities use WebEx and other modes, but specifically Zoom Pro. Additionally, we're going to be discussing the best practices for event organization and management moving forward.
So just a little bit about our university. So we have more than 10,000 international students on our campus each year. About 3,500 of those are new each year and require orientations both before they arrive to campus and once they get on campus. This chart on the right-hand side shows a little bit about our representation. So we have the most students from China, followed by India, South Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, and so on. So this just gives you a little bit of an idea of the scope of students we're trying to reach when we talk about our orientations before campus, and then the type of students we're serving when you get to campus. So before the pandemic, our orientation sort of fell in 2 categories. And when we had to pivot to virtual, these were the orientations that we were pivoting. So we have our pre-arrival, commonly called pre-departure orientations on some other campuses. Those are in-person orientations hosted abroad in specific countries. We've typically been limited to 2 countries, China and South Korea historically. This year we were supposed to go to China and India for the first time. So presentations we had during those orientations were everything students needed to know before they got to campus. So immigration information, getting registered for classes, things like that. We also had breakout sessions for undergrad and graduate students. We also had a breakout session for parents. And then we always had student groups represented in those orientations as well. And then there were also a lunch and networking activities. So a great chance for us to get to know our students a little bit better before they got to campus.
Absolutely. And then we had on-campus orientations. This is when students arrived on campus, which was historically in person. This was an opportunity for students and their parents to get a tour on campus. Presentations included multiple presentations from campus departments that came together to provide information around their units and different aspects of the organization of the university. Additionally, there was an opportunity for students to orient themselves in their academic departments and during their own specific orientation, and then an opportunity to socially engage, which also took place in the duration of a few days. Programming and social activities across campus, opportunity to meet orientation leaders and other peers on campus.
So we are going to talk a lot today in the context of Zoom. And so I just wanted to take a moment to distinguish maybe a few features. And I promise this is not sponsored content, even though we are on Zoom today. So we use both meeting and webinar. They are definitely different experiences. Meeting is what we're in today, where you can see all the participants. You can chat to the to everyone in the group, whereas webinar, you have a panel and you're sort of protected from seeing everyone else who is in that meeting. And so we'll talk a little bit more about why we chose each platform for each type of orientation model. But I do just want to note that we will be speaking specifically in our context of Zoom. But I think, as Florence said, you know, these models that we're going to talk about can be duplicated for other platforms like WebEx. I know some folks are using Microsoft Teams, so I think these can be matched to those platforms as well. So we have broken up our presentation today into what we consider the three models of orientations that we offered. So the first is what we're calling the real-time model. So in this structure, we're using Zoom Meeting. We purchased a license from within our institution for up to 1,000 participants. This structure included live presentations with Q&A after specific presentation blocks. So everyone was much like we are today, on the meeting in real time and serving students in whatever time zone they found themselves. We did do breakout rooms by academic level, so giving an opportunity for a more like personalized academic experience by a grad or undergraduate level. The runtime was approximately 2.5 hours for these orientations, and we offered multiple sessions with the same content to accommodate different time zones. So we had one for the Americas, one for Europe, Central Africa, one for East Asia, and then one for Southeast Asia, Middle East. And all of these sessions were recorded and made available both on our YouTube channel and via another sharing platform that accommodated our students in China. So this is an overview of what the schedule looked like. This particular model was used for those pre-arrival orientations I mentioned earlier. So it's a lot of what you need to know before you get to campus. So that's why the schedule sort of looks the way it does. As you can see, we have sort of blocks of presentations with Q&A. We had a break in the middle of the orientations, and then the breakout sessions and more information following that. I think each of these models we're going to talk about today has things that we really like and things that maybe we don't like so much. And so we're going to try to share a bit of both. So the good thing about this model, if we're looking in our pre-arrival orientation context, I think I mentioned we could only go to 2 countries. Doing virtual orientations actually opened us up to being able to serve students wherever they were. And for us, that was a huge, huge bonus. And I think it's actually something that even when we're able to travel again, we're planning to still offer a version of these virtual orientations, just because we want to make sure that we have equitable service to all of our students. I think the live model has sort of a natural feel to it. You can stumble over your words, you can say something, correct yourself. It feels sort of natural. And so we felt that was kind of like a personal experience that, you know, you're missing when you're doing something virtually. Having a break was really, really good. Zoom fatigue is definitely a thing. We're all on our screens all the time. And so I think that helps students, and it also helped us and our presenters take a break, take a breather, and regroup for the next set of presentations. And then the other good thing is this was a really manageable attendance time we felt. We didn't see a huge drop off in the number of students. So aiming for that 2-hour, 2.5-hour mark seemed to serve students well. The not so good. There were, of course, a few things that we would have loved to have changed. 2.5 hours to cover all of the information that you usually cover in a full day or sometimes multiple days worth of orientations is a pretty tight timeline. You have to pare down a lot. And so I think at times our presenters felt a little constrained. And then the other side is that a lot of students had questions this year. This was an unconventional year, and we weren't able to address all of those. We found solutions to get to those student questions eventually, which we'll talk about later, but in the moment, we weren't able to address everyone's questions. Because again of that tight timeline, we made the decision not to include the student groups, which in the orientations that this model was used for was usually a core component. And so we did feel like a little something was missing there, and we're trying to consider how we can make space for that in the future. And then last but not least, you know, this is virtual, it's technology, it doesn't always go your way. And so we did have a few tech issues, particularly with the breakout rooms and trying to keep everyone organized. So that's a little bit about our first model, and I will turn it over to Florence for our next two.
Thank you, Marta. So our second model is what included synchronous learning, pre-recorded presentations with live question and answers. So ultimately, the structure included using the Zoom Pro meeting styles up to 1,000 participants, where we included a live introduction followed by pre-recorded presentations from each campus partner on campus, followed by a live Q&A after their specific presentation was played. We offered an opportunity for campus partners to also engage within the chat if questions that were asked in the public sphere of Zoom were not asked during the presentation. So we offered an opportunity for our campus partner to stay a little bit after and discuss and answer questions within the chat. We also offered an option where if parents, if students needed extra time, extra information, or had specific concerns, an opportunity for them to engage by breakout room only with the campus partner, with the student to engage more one-on-one style. The runtime for this experience was approximately 4 hours. And the wonderful experience about this structure was that we were able to record the entire experience for people to then watch later. So this is the actual schedule that we presented for the day that everyone had access to. And we had, as I mentioned, a live welcome and overview from our director all the way to information around University Police Department, COVID through our McKinley Health Center, and updates from our International Student and Scholar Services. So the good. We found that Zoom was an opportunity that was absolutely accessible to everyone. There was a waiting room option, so it was an experience where people could come in and convene and have the experience together and exit and enter as they pleased. As I mentioned, the welcome experience was live and was the only aspect of this pre-recorded experience to be live. And that was really important to us, considering our specific target audience of international students, specifically their parents, students themselves who come from countries or spaces that have high power distance, really want to have that face-to-face experience or interaction with directors, vice chancellors. So I absolutely recommend having that live experience or option if you would like to scale up or implement this experience. As I mentioned, the presentations were recorded. So this was an opportunity for us to engage our campus partners, have one-on-one time, coach them up, mentor up with respect to public speaking skills, making sure that we didn't use idioms or acronyms that we often incorporate as part of our vocabulary. Additionally, as an opportunity to engage further, there was a wonderful opportunity for us to archive each presentation separately, as separate from the entire orientation experience, which was also important to us as well. The question and answer was held right after each presentation, where usually we would have everyone present and then have an opportunity for questions to engage at the end. So this was really important for students, families who had or needed fresh information or had fresh questions so that they can engage our campus partners. Additionally, presenters were generous with their time. We were absolutely thankful that they were willing and wanting to stay after to engage information or engage questions in the chat. Additionally, what the opportunity allowed us in coaching and mentoring our campus partners around campus was an opportunity for us to see their presentation in advance, to make sure that the recording was clear, to make sure that their acoustics, what room they were in, what language they were using was clear, so that anyone who suffered from maybe presentation anxiety, someone who wanted to update their own skills on Zoom recording or PowerPoint recording was able to do so. So the not so good. This was a one-day event. Historically, our orientations have taken place a full day or a couple days, including social hour and experience. So this was a one-day event that included no breaks. The question and answer session was one after each presentation, as I mentioned, which was a kind of strained experience for those who wanted to maybe go back if they had a question in mind that they wanted to engage with the campus partner that had already left the experience. So that was something that did come up during our assessment, which we will discuss later on. As we mentioned, there was a great opportunity for us to engage our campus partners to mentor them. But this experience does take longer time, providing an opportunity to engage one-on-one time or having training presentations where our campus partners convene together to kind of discuss, as I mentioned, some of the language, the pace, acoustics, our expectations and goals for our orientation. We did remove the student panel due to time. And the student panel historically has been a wonderful opportunity for our students who are coming to campus for the first time to kind of get the student point of view, the student experience, student tours, etc. So this was a moment where we needed to engage separately from the informational experience of the orientation. As I mentioned, the total runtime was 4 hours. So we do know that our presenters, our logistical staff, along with our students who stayed the entire time, did experience some Zoom fatigue and had to maybe time their breaks as they saw fit. Okay, Model 3, which included asynchronous pre-recorded presentations with live Q&A. So the structure, we use Zoom Pro webinar feature for up to 1,000 participants, which we did get permission from our institution to do so. So this experience included live introductions, but what we did was allowed our campus partner to send in pre-recorded presentations, send them to our parents, our students in advance for them to then look at during their own time, conjure up questions that they may have had, and then a schedule for when an experience that included solely question and answers was going to be held. Parents, students, families, dependents were able to log on and then ask questions as they saw fit. This was an experience that was wonderful because it offered an opportunity to engage questions the entire time, which was an aspect of our orientation that's constantly being discussed in our assessment. There was never enough time for questions. So this opportunity was an opportunity for us to engage all the questions that students, parents, families had. We made this experience accessible for 5 different time zones with special emphasis to our largest population of India and China. The runtime was approximately 2 hours or less, depending on the amount of questions that we were answering or engaging with. This experience was not recorded due to the rapid changing directions, information around COVID-19, immigration, etc., to ensure that, that our campus partners, our family, students were able to get the most up-to-date information so that they were able to make the best decisions for that time. So this is an example of the schedule and presentations of recordings that were made available. And this was, and it's important to emphasize that this was specifically for our undergraduate student population. So information about athletics was definitely important to them, the counseling center, engaging with the Dean of Students and the Office of Inclusion and Intercultural Relations, which is a space where student engagement, social activities are commonly had. So we wanted to make sure that undergraduate students knew the type of information and resources needed to thrive at U of I. So the good. We were able to send materials in advance. The pre-recorded materials, brochures that were accompanied by certain information, links, an opportunity for students to also engage in the type of questions that were being asked in the space, and enough time for preparation so that questions can be asked in advance. This experience was dedicated solely to answering questions, and it addressed all the questions during the Q&A chat. We were able to promote questions that we believed were high priority. We were able to then ask questions in a way that we believed was a thematized experience. So this was a great experience to really engage with the information that our panelists had for the experience. Additionally, we had student group representation. So questions that students had with respect to life on campus, the student perspective was valued and really needed and honored in this space. So it was a wonderful experience to really engage and discuss the experiences that students had and questions that students who were ready to matriculate through U of I would have. Parents were invited and attended this experience and also were able to ask their questions. So the not so good. As I mentioned, this experience was solely for questions. So what that meant was that this was an opportunity for us, or we had given an opportunity for our participants to ask any and every question that they saw fit. And what this ended up doing was that our panelists had to be equipped and strategic with respect to the responses that they were given, being honest about not having a response, which could be difficult for presenters or people who don't want to say, actually, we don't have a response to that yet. So this was an opportunity for us to, again, ask questions that were of interest for students, parents of any and every kind. So this was very challenging because sometimes we also had to skip over questions and then come back to the question that weren't relevant to the actual experience of the goals of the orientation.
So after the event, for each of these orientations, since they were all new for us too, assessment became an important part of our planning process. So we did an assessment on 2 layers, first with our audience. So we conducted a survey of our participants, asking them, did the date and time work for you? How valuable were each of the presentations that were given to you? How did you feel about the structure of the orientation? We have 3 different models here, and each, as you've seen, has pros and cons. So which direction do students tend to prefer? Also, what sessions or information would you have liked to have seen? It's always hard to cover everything you want, and especially when information is changing so rapidly, as we've talked about. So hearing, the student experience and the parent experience about what it is you would have liked to have seen was really valuable to us. And we use this information to develop the content structure for the future orientations. I do want to note, the model order that we've talked about is actually also the order in which we experience them. So first we went completely live and did 4 versions of that, each getting a little better each time. And then we assessed our students, and then we're able to move on into these next 2 orientations. And so if you're looking specifically for which audience was served, Model 1, the live event, was for the pre-arrival orientations. Model 2 was for our graduate students, so it was that all-day event. And then Model 3 was for our undergraduate students and their parents. So you can sort of see how the models have changed to respond to each audience. And a lot of that was based on the assessment. Also, a lot of people gave their time to these orientations in the virtual space at varying levels of comfort. And we have a lot of colleagues who we're very grateful to, who have collaborated to make these events successful. And so hearing their feedback was equally as important to us as hearing our audience feedback. And so we had group discussions about what worked well, what did not work well, very frank and honest conversations. We specifically talked about date and time, including the overall run time, issues like Zoom fatigue, things like that, how we could respond better. We talked about our breakout sessions and also just the overall experience of using Zoom, and maybe even thinking about what other platforms we could utilize in the future that would work well or work better than Zoom. And so we use this information to, again, build on that experience, better mentor our presenters, as Florence talked about, and our orientation leaders. And, because this was our first time doing this, we did put together, a small final report, just reminding ourselves, here's what we did, here's what the assessment said, and next year, here's what we would do differently, just so that we could have a good institutional record of that. So let's talk about some best practices, things that we have learned that make these experiences a little bit better. So I think one of the most important ones for us was defining clear roles and responsibilities. And that comes in sort of 2 ways. There's the behind the scenes, and then Florence is going to talk about the forward facing. But behind the scenes, it is really important to have a tech manager. As you can see, even today, Rachel is our tech manager. And for most of the real-time models, I was the tech manager for that. And it's really good to have one person who's just dedicated to that, who doesn't have to worry about all of these other pieces, because in the virtual space, anything can happen. We had multiple recorders. So if you're recording a presentation in Zoom, you can have multiple people doing that and receive, like holding it in the cloud or on their desktop. We found that a good practice because when we were doing breakout rooms, shuttling people into different rooms and making sure someone was recording that presentation as well, because it's not automatic. Those little technical things, having multiple people prepared to manage them was really, really helpful. And then chat management. This is a really important aspect for all of these orientations because all of them have Q&A. And as we've talked about, that seemed to be one of the most important pieces of these orientations. And so having at least two people who can collect the questions, keep them organized, keep the, even ask them on behalf of the students so that students don't have to hop on the Zoom with maybe a spotty mic or a bad connection. And we'll talk a little bit more about maybe how we organize our chat managers later. So Florence, forward facing.
Thank you, Marta. So forward facing the MC, we definitely recommend one person being responsible for the event welcome and closing. And in this for us was often a member of the senior leadership. And I want to emphasize this because again, our international students really wanted to match a face with a name. And also this was an opportunity to also distinct the panelists from the actual, or our campus partners from someone who was welcoming them to the university on a vice chancellor or director level. So this was very important. We also recommend that the facilitator be one person or someone who is just able to understand the flow of the experience. So making sure that our panelists were clear about where to be and when to be, understanding that we had time limits and making sure that someone who was able to kind of effectively tell or ask participants, you have 2 minutes left, 1 more minute left, to kind of timeline out that experience. So we had one person dedicated to that so that each panelist knew this was my go-to person. This is the person that has the most information about this. And then the presenters, making sure that the presenters were oriented properly with enough time and being able to ensure that we had an opportunity to engage all of their questions was very important in building that rapport and continuing to build the collegial relationship that we are building on campus, especially during our collaborative orientation experience. So ensuring that our presenters were hosts or co-hosts for this experience so that they were able to ask any questions or have the full experience that Zoom could offer as a presenter was very important to ensure that our panelists were able to answer questions, use every chat feature, and also engage in breakout sessions for or with students. So the chat management, if I could be so bold, this is probably one of the most crucial experiences of the orientation. One of our ground rules in the space was that our questions will be taken through the chat, which meant that the experience was muted for participants or audience members. So what that meant is that you needed someone who had the dexterity, the patience, the strategy to be able to decipher what was a question, what were comments. Several things are happening in the chat that could oftentimes be overwhelming for someone who isn't equipped or have the patience to say, okay, this is a question, this has already been answered, or maybe we're not going to add this to the list. So I would definitely recommend that having someone who's responsible for collecting all the questions and asking them to the panelists or to the campus partners is very crucial. We used a Google Doc to house all the questions in particular. And we definitely recommend this option because it's an opportunity to host large scale questions. If you have multiple chat managers, everyone has access to it. People are able to cut and paste right on the document and keep track of what's being asked and answered. So specifically, the way we did that was to create a key for organizing the Google Doc that helps you manage the incoming questions that are constantly coming in. As we mentioned, our Zoom Pro license for up to 1,000 people. So there was lots of things, again, happening in the chat. So we organized the Google Doc based on each presentation and then added the questions that came out of each presentation. Then from there, we were able to then thematize the questions that were coming in order to prioritize the questions in ask order. We definitely recommend that you highlight the unanswered or answered questions to keep track of what's being answered in the virtual orientation space, what needs more information. We also recommend that if you want to follow up with the student, to cut and paste who is asking the question so that you're able to then cross-check with your logistics or registration so that you can get in contact with the student, follow up with panelists to get in contact with or follow up if the response wasn't clear per se. So again, the chat management was the most crucial experience of each orientation, insofar as we dedicated one of our orientation models to answering questions in this way.
I just want to say Florence is an excellent chat manager. She was chat manager for all 4 of the orientations that were live, and she's excellent at it. Could not have done that without her. So I mentioned earlier, we're using Zoom, and we made different calculations as to whether or not meeting or webinar was the right option for the orientation. So whatever platform it is that you're using, I would say that my best advice is to just really try to understand as much of what it can offer you. I think it's sort of very easy to just log on, jump in and go for it, which you can certainly do. We definitely have done that before, but I think really understanding all of the tools in your arsenal when you're using your virtual platform is really critical. For us, when we're making decisions about what we wanted for these orientations, these are some of the key features that we were picking between. So, with meeting, you have all participants who can, in theory, participate. But in webinar, only the host and the panelists. So there are some, pros and cons there. And so these are just the things that we wanted to highlight that we use to make our decisions, and hopefully can help you consider and make your own decisions when it comes to using Zoom or a similar platform. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of information. We're close to the end to being able to take your questions, but we wanted to spend some time, helping you consider which model is right for you. And maybe it's a hybrid of all 3. That could be entirely possible, but these are sort of the order in which we recommend you think through your planning process. So first is identifying your goals. What is it that you want your students, parents, or other participants, even presenters, to get out of this orientation? And I think, audience is the next thing on that list. I do think the goals come first and foremost, because when you get to your audience, deciding who it is you're actually going to be serving to meet those goals, I think is important. Considering the time, both the run time and the time of day, we had orientations that started at 11 p.m. We had orientations that started at 6 a.m. We had some that were anywhere within that time frame. So understanding, how long you're going to spend on this and what time of day you're going to do it at, and then having that clearly defined is, I think, really important. Your campus partners and presenters, who is going to work with you on this project? I think, listening to what it is that they are comfortable with and what information they want to share, and then responding to that is really critical. And so once you have your goals, your audience, and your time, you're sort of better equipped to decide who is going to be the best fit for this information that we want to present. Commitment and bandwidth. I think, throughout the last 6 to 8 months, we're all maybe at a lower bandwidth than we've probably ever been. And I think a lot of us felt that when we had to pivot to our pre-arrival orientations to virtual. That was the first model we talked about. And so I think being really honest with yourself and your team about what level of commitment and bandwidth you have. There's going to be individuals who are in really small offices. There's going to be people who are in medium-sized universities, big universities. Listen to what you're capable of doing and do that, because you want to put forward the best. And if you don't have the bandwidth for that, you shouldn't push yourself, because then, you know, it's the human side, right? Like it'll suffer as a result. Your platform, whether it's Zoom or something else, you know, understanding your platform and what you're going to move forward with is really important. And then once you have all of that information figured out, we recommend you pick an orientation model. You can use the information we presented, or you can find a hybrid of your own. But I think that's sort of the order that in hindsight we would use to create our future virtual orientations. So we wanted to make sure that folks who attended today not only walked away with all of this information, but also with some resources that you could use to create your own orientation. So at this link, you can find both a copy of this presentation. You can find a document that includes direct links to all of our various models. So you can see an example of what it was like live and the recorded version of that. You can see some of the pre-recorded presentations that we made, and you can also see the longer event that we talked about in Model 2. Also, we included a copy of our assessment, a copy of our registration form, and copies of our invite templates and things like that that you can use to build your own orientations. And hopefully that information also supplements a lot of what we've talked about today. So we are happy to take any questions that you might have, and thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Marta and Florence. Really appreciate it. Scott, do you want to go ahead and start maybe letting us know what questions have been placed?
Sure. Marta and Florence, you indicated in the presentation that you typically are using Zoom for a lot of these presentations. Would you be able to share any additional platforms that you might be using to connect with students in China?
Sure. So for other orientations, we haven't tried any other platforms in China. We had tested Zoom with our colleagues in our Shanghai office who are residential in China. So we knew that this was something that was going to work for us. In terms of sharing pre-recorded materials though, we have a platform called Box. I believe it's owned by Google. We used that to share recordings. We also have a Youku channel, which is like the Chinese version of YouTube. So we were able to upload presentations there as well. So it was sort of other tools and resources that we already had in our arsenal for that. But I would recommend, you know, seeing if you have a colleague in country, or maybe doing some research or asking, you know, like us, if we can like test something for you. I think one issue we did encounter that's maybe sort of related to this space is, you know, Zoom is not accessible for some countries that have US sanctions. So I believe Iraq, Saudi Arabia, a couple countries where we actually welcome a lot of students from. So we, to account for that, we sent a question survey in advance, say, what questions do you have that we can address for you? And then we sent the recording to those students in those areas, just to make sure that, okay, they couldn't attend live, but they could at least see it after the fact. So that may be a consideration as well.
Thank you. And you kind of identified when you use the Model 2 with graduate students and Model 3 with undergraduate students and parents, and you kind of listed some of the identifying criteria for the right model. What really do you think drove you to choose one model over the other when addressing specific audiences, or was it really the goals, or could you clarify a little bit more your decision-making process when you were choosing between the two models?
That's an excellent question. There were several factors in space and place. So for example, the undergraduate orientation was an opportunity to use, so again, the order of models mattered. So what ended up happening is that we were using the assessment from each model to make each experience better. And once we realized that students really wanted a space to engage the questions that they had, we then decided to go with that specifically for the undergraduate student population as a feature that also allowed us to engage parents, which was not an experience that we incorporated as part of the graduate orientation specifically. So with that said, we knew that we also wanted an opportunity to have student representation, which was an experience that we took out of the graduate student experience. So we needed student representation to answer questions and responses that were coming out of the kind of pre-question and answer period. So what I would recommend is either providing an opportunity for your tentative participants or audience members to submit in questions in advance so that you can then prepare your panelists for what's going to be asked in the space. Or to be in consultation. As I mentioned, this was a collaborative experience with our campus partners who are just as excited as we are to receive our international students. So in consultation with the campus partners, it's also engaging with what their bandwidth looks like and whether or not it matches our bandwidth as well. So if you have an office or a few offices that aren't comfortable with staying the entire time for, let's say, a 7 a.m. call time for orientation, then that allowed us to switch the format in particular. Or if there was an experience where we knew that, okay, our campus partner wanted to send in a pre-recorded presentation that represented their office, but send in a campus partner that was different from the person who was engaging in the specific recorded experience, then we also allowed for that to happen. So there's several factors in Space and Place, as we mentioned, incorporating the goals, keeping in mind the target audience, and keeping in mind the campus partners' bandwidth or your own office's bandwidth with respect to giving that information, I think will help you make the decision on how to run the orientation experience for your specific university.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, it really was simply like a trial and error because, you know, we did the real-time model first and I think at the time we were like, how we had to very quickly respond to changing our orientations. And so we're like, okay, let's just, you know, do it live and here we go. And so I think that each time we sort of saw issues, you know, like having presentations run over. And then, you know, there were other folks on campus that were doing like recording videos for students and sending them out. And so I think we're like, okay, well, maybe let's incorporate that. So I think, you know, the core of the decision was just that we tried some things and some of them didn't work. And also I should note that each of these three models, the versions of the orientations were, the core organizer was a different person. So I think those, you know, unique staff perspectives had us make different decisions. And so when we were putting this presentation together today, we tried to like bring those all together, all of our sort of thoughts, what we liked, what we didn't like, what we prefer, into something that I think makes a bit more sense. So there's a little bit of just, you know, what do you value in terms of an experience happening a little bit there as well.
Thank you. I'm going to go with potentially a couple of quick questions, and then we'll kind of get to some questions that are all connected. How do you handle the break? Do you have music playing or videos airing? And do you think there's an optimal amount of time to give students the break during the presentations?
So for the break, we did not have any technology or any video playing, any music or anything like that. We did have our MC sort of like lead people into the break and then sort of jump back on and say, oh, we're getting close to, you know, starting back up the orientation. The reason for that is at the time, the host in Zoom is the only person that can break people out into rooms. And so we were using that break a lot of times to put people in breakout rooms as efficiently as we could. Because not everyone logged in with the email they registered with. So we purposely didn't engage in any other technology use because we were trying very much to do that quickly. And then what was the second part of that question? Scott, do you want to remind?
The optimal amount of time.
So I think we had, I would say anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes is ideal for, you know, like a 2-hour window. Anything more, if you have like maybe a longer window, you could consider a longer break, but you do lose people when there's a break, especially if you're going into breakout rooms. That's where we did see the sharpest decline. People would be like, well, I've gotten my general information. Or like when coming back from a breakout room after a break, like they would just disappear because like, I've gotten all the information I need. I don't want to hear this last bit. So I would say personally, if you're going a 2-hour window, 10 minutes is sort of the sweet spot.
If I can also add, though we weren't playing any music or engaging specifically um, or technologically, as Marta has discussed, as part of that experience, there were lots of things happening in the chat. So our MC was also adding in links, clarifying information. There was also lots of background information because students are also engaging with themselves in the chat. In fact, there was a moment during during the graduate orientation where we actually disabled the chat. And then our MC mentioned, I'm getting a lot of private emails about enabling the chat. So those aspects also add to the experience. And part of the kind of break time that's happening is also an opportunity for people to engage with each other during that time. So I definitely recommend, again, that chat experience is going to be really crucial, and an opportunity to share information. A lot of things are happening, but it's also a great space and place to engage.
Great, thank you. Hopefully a quick question. When you sent the pre-recorded materials to the students, were they required to view them? And if it was required, how did you know if they actually watched the pre-recorded materials?
That's an excellent question. So honestly, I wouldn't even call our orientations required. They're highly suggested, but our students always come because they want to learn more information. Specifically, in using Box or our kind of SharePoint informational tool, we are able to keep track of the downloads. We're able to keep track of how many times someone is looking at a specific video. Though, so it wasn't necessarily mandated, but we definitely did get a lot of that data in advance. So that also helped us prepare for that question and answer period for specifically our undergraduate students.
And then one more potentially quick technical question. When you were recording multiple presentations from various constituents throughout the campus, how were you able to ultimately compile them into one presentation?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Okay, so with respect to, again, using Box, our campus partners were able to upload their presentations. We gave them a specific deadline, a specific goal, and we had actually three, one internal goal on our end, but an outward facing goal. So I definitely recommend that you plan logistically and keep in mind people who may need a little bit more time or who may need a little bit more training as part of that timeline to ensure that each presentation is being uploaded in time. From there, the office that I'm at, we were all able to then break up the videos to then look at each video to look for errors, make sure that the acoustics were okay, make sure the playback was clear. And then from there, our MC was responsible for playing each video during our actual presentation or orientation that was recorded as one whole experience. I hope that's clear.
I think so. We're going to shift a little bit. We have a couple of questions related to campus partners, and I think given the time frame, it would be good to kind of address those at this point in time. And let's first maybe begin with how did you actually go about determining the lineup of campus partners to include?
That's a great question. I think at least for you know, the orientations for students before they came to campus, we essentially looked at, you know, what does a new student checklist look like and what are the things that they need to know that they might not get before they get to campus. So I think for us, at least for our international students, you know, that's a lot of the health, the immunization forms and other immunizations and things that they need. Immigration information, what to expect at U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, academics. You know, the timing of our orientations wasn't has never been quite right for the academics, but I think next year we're going to move them earlier so that we can make sure that students learn how to register before they have to go through the registration process, because that's a lot of what is talked about in those orientations. So for at least the before arrival, we're looking at what is most important to them before they get to campus. The rest of that information they will get once they get here, and we just sort of take the approach they don't need to deal with it right this second because they'll get it in other forms. Florence, do you want to talk about the on-campus?
Definitely. Similarly, we definitely had a format in place with respect to what our historical in-person orientation included. But then what we ended up doing was prioritizing what was animating the experience and the anxieties and concerns of parents and students. So that was immigration for us. That was COVID-19 health centered for us. That was where am I going to live, housing for us. So again, these were concerns that we knew were on the forefront of our participant audience's mind. So we decided to upgrade them or prioritize them as part of the schedule, which then actually informed our decision to then take out the kind of student panel experience, which has historically been part of our in-person orientation. But we knew that, for example, that experience included a campus tour or an opportunity to network in person. So we wanted to create an informational type of experience that really focused on the questions and concerns that were on the forefront of students' minds. Specifically for undergrads, we wanted to make sure that they understood CAPS, our health, and this is important for our graduate, for all of our orientations, frankly. But then also ensuring that there's certain aspects of the collegiate experiences that look different for a graduate and undergraduate student. So for example, we optimize student legal services for our graduate students, but then optimize athletics for our undergraduate students so as an opportunity to engage. So trying to keep in mind the experiences that the undergraduate student will go through and what an undergraduate student will go through will look completely different, and keeping in mind the type of resources that we wanted them to have in order to thrive in the specific way that they were matriculating at U of I.
Thank you. And carrying on with the questions related to campus partners, sometimes working with campus partners can be a little bit difficult when you're trying to make sure that you're not telling them how to do their jobs. So how do you actually go about doing that when you're working with the campus partners? How are you making sure that you're essentially not telling them what they need to be doing, that you're working them into the actual process of creating the presentations, delivering the presentations? And then in general, do you have any tips that you have for engaging with campus partners?
Sure. So I think having those goals outlined for the orientations in advance is really, really helpful. Because then when you're inviting them to participate in this event, you have, you're able to tell them this is what we're trying to do. And then it sort of, hopefully gives them then a framework to work within. So having those goals in advance, I think for us, we sometimes had them, sometimes we were more open-ended. So I think when we look ahead to the future, definitely narrowing those down is really critical. And then sort of tips for working with partners. I think one thing I have found is becoming just their resource, someone that they can turn to in the virtual space. That's where that like understanding your platform and understanding your goals becomes really, really critical. We had, folks at varying levels of comfortability. And so just being able to actively listen to them, respond to them, build that sort of interpersonal relationship and make it strong, then allowed us to maybe push back in some areas where we wanted to push back. I know that for our pre-arrival orientations, this is definitely an area where we've struggled because everyone always wants to share all of the information before students get to campus. And, working on those over the years, I think we've continued to hone our goals and, really emphasize this is a before you get to campus situation. And so that allows us to steer folks a little bit more directly into the lanes that we want them in. So I think it's at the end of the day, I think it comes down to just everyone has a lot of passion for the areas in which they work. Florence and I are certainly no exception, and everyone we worked with on every single one of these orientations is that way. And so I think having respect for that, leaning into that, but also having your goals in mind and working with them to facilitate them, it goes a long way.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try and get maybe two questions combining. One would be, do you have a post-orientation assessment to gather feedback from the students, campus partners, and staff? And then two, if you do have it, and as you're reviewing the feedback, do you anticipate primarily staying with online virtual spaces going forward, or is this just temporary and then once COVID has finished, you're going to go back to your previous models?
So yes, we can definitely answer that. So we do have an assessment. We don't do a survey assessment for our participants. That's more of just a conversation, like a group meeting, a sort of debrief after the fact. But our assessment is included in that link that we shared, the one that goes to students, so you can see how we assess our orientations. And then for our orientations that happen before students get to campus, those will probably continue to be virtual in some way. We might still travel after COVID, but we're definitely going to have virtual orientation options for those students that we don't serve. So it's not done after COVID. I think we realize this is a permanent addition.
Thanks. And I know we're getting close to time, but I think we still have maybe a minute or two left where we could potentially answer a couple quick questions. It sounded like the rules and regulations type portion of the presentation was no longer than 15 or 20 minutes. Is that accurate? And did that seem sufficient? And then an additional question maybe would be, are they receiving additional information once they're arriving in another format or in another model?
Yeah, so I think it is sufficient for what we try to cover in that session. We addressed a lot of changing regulation information in the Q&As, but I will say that we were definitely following up with students. We had emails going out. We had a COVID-19 regulations questions webpage. We had created a lot of resources outside of the orientations. And because things changed so rapidly, anytime we recorded something, we sort of said, as of today, this is what is true. And then as of today, and then, next orientation, as of today, this is what is true. So we did make an effort to communicate to students in other ways.
And I know this isn't necessarily directly related to orientation, but do you have any ideas for how to replace campus tours?
I do, yes. So our admissions office has done some really cool things with virtual reality. So those are really cool video tours. And again, we've made them accessible to our students in China through that Youku / Chinese version of YouTube platform. So we have VR tours now. We have video tours that have been filmed actually during the pandemic, following all the guidelines. And so those I think have really helped, and students have really enjoyed those. We've also had some students in the Chinese social media space where I work actually make their own video tours of campus. And so we've been sharing those to sort of give that student experience, and those have gone over really well and been super great. And I do just want to say, if you have other questions that we weren't able to get to today, Florence and I are certainly available to you. These are our emails. Feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions that you may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marta and Florence. We really appreciate you coming in and presenting today on this topic. I know we all found it very valuable. So thank you so much. And once again, to everyone, we will have the recording of the presentation up on the NAFSA 5 YouTube page, hopefully pretty soon. And again, feel free to reach out to Marta and Florence if you have any additional questions. So thank you everyone for coming, and we hope to see you at other sessions today.
Thank you.
Thank you.